It all started innocently enough, an invite to a party that seemed like nothing more than a casual work event. But when my wife walked out the door that evening, dressed to kill in a form-fitting black dress, I knew things wouldn't end as we'd planned. What I didn't know was that the night would unravel in ways I could never have anticipated. I had always trusted her. We had been together for years, built a life based on mutual respect, love, and commitment. We had weathered the storms, the ups and downs, and I thought that we were solid, stronger than ever. But deep down, a little voice in my head whispered that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't the first time I'd had that nagging feeling. The little comments, the strange texts, the late nights she'd come home, her scent different somehow, these things had all added up, but I pushed them away. I told myself I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. After all, I had no real evidence. She was my wife, my partner in life. Then came the party invitation, a work celebration for her boss, Thomas. I didn't know him well. He was a good 10 years older than us, with a slick smile, a silver tongue, and a reputation for being a little too charming for his own good. He had a way of making people feel important, special. And when it came to my wife, well, I should have known better. She had spent hours getting ready that night. When she stepped out in her dress, her hair perfectly styled, I felt a twinge of unease. She looked stunning, absolutely radiant, but the look in her eyes, it wasn't the same. She had that glimmer, that spark in her gaze that I hadn't seen in a while. Maybe it was just excitement for the party. Maybe it was something else. I kissed her goodbye and told her to have fun, but the doubt gnawed at me. Maybe it was just my overactive imagination. Maybe I was being foolish. But as the evening wore on, my stomach tightened. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When the clock struck midnight and she still hadn't come home, I decided to take matters into my own hands. No more waiting. No more wondering. I grabbed my coat and set out for the venue, my heart pounding in my chest. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how little I really knew about Thomas. Just how little I knew about what was happening behind the scenes. And deep down, I knew something had changed in my marriage. Something I couldn't ignore anymore. As I drove through the city, the streets blurred by the glow of headlights and the sound of my thoughts racing, I tried to calm myself. It could be nothing. Just a late night at work, a few drinks, a little harmless fun. But my instincts, honed over years of being with her, told me otherwise. When I finally arrived at the venue, a sleek hotel with grand windows that reflected the city's lights, my stomach twisted in knots. There was no sign of her car, but I wasn't about to let that stop me. I walked through the entrance, scanning the crowd of well-dressed professionals. It didn't take long to spot him, Thomas. He was laughing, surrounded by a group of people, but his eyes flicked to me almost immediately. There was something in his gaze that made my blood run cold. It was the same look he gave me the last time we had crossed paths, charming, confident, but somehow predatory. I didn't have to wait long to see my wife. She was standing near the bar, her back to me, laughing a little too loudly, a little too freely. And standing just a little too close to Thomas. My chest tightened. I could see it now, the subtle touch of his hand on her lower back, the way he leaned in close, whispering in her ear. She responded, her smile widening, her body angling just a little toward him. The way she tilted her head, as if she was savoring his attention. The pang of jealousy hit me so hard, it was like a punch to the gut. I had seen this before. In the way she interacted with other men, the way she flirted, the way she had always been just a little too friendly when someone caught her interest. But this felt different. I stayed back, observing, my heart racing as I processed what I was seeing. It was as if my entire world, my whole perception of my marriage, was being called into question right before my eyes. This wasn't just friendly chatter. This wasn't just a work event. No, this was something more. The whispers between them grew longer. I could see him leaning in again, his lips almost brushing her ear as she laughed. Too close. Too intimate. My pulse quickened as I moved toward them, my mind made up. I wasn't going to stand there and watch this any longer. I had made a decision the moment I stepped through that door. I was going to confront him. I didn't know what was going on between them, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let it slide. My wife, the woman I loved, was caught up in something, and I wasn't about to let her, or him, think they could get away with it. With every step I took toward them, the anger inside me bubbled up. How could she do this? How could she let it go this far? And Thomas, what did he think he was doing? Trying to steal my wife right under my nose? As I approached, I could feel the tension building, the storm that was about to break. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I was done staying silent. Done pretending like everything was fine. I needed answers. I needed to know the truth. I could hear their conversation more clearly now. She was smiling, her face flushed with laughter, but I could see the slight shift in her body when she noticed me approaching. She stiffened ever so slightly. Her smile faltered, but it was barely noticeable. Thomas, on the other hand, turned to face me completely, his grin widening in recognition. And that's when it happened, the moment I knew I had to act. He didn't look at me with surprise or guilt. No, there was something else in his eyes. Something smug, something self-assured. It was as if he knew exactly what I was about to do. And he didn't care. I didn't hesitate. I strode up to them, locking eyes with Thomas, my voice calm but sharp as I spoke directly to him. You think you can just come into my life and steal my wife? I said, each word cold and deliberate, hanging in the air like a challenge. My gaze flicked to her, but I didn't give her a chance to respond. Not yet. He raised an eyebrow, his smile still intact. I think you might be overreacting a bit, don't you think? Oh, I don't think so, I replied, my anger rising. I've been watching you too, and I've seen enough. For a moment, he said nothing, just studied me with that irritating air of superiority. My wife, her face pale now, shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking between us, a mixture of confusion and guilt clouding her expression. It was time to turn the night into his worst nightmare. The moment hung between us like a thick fog, suffocating and impossible to escape. Thomas didn't flinch, didn't look the least bit worried. He simply crossed his arms, as if daring me to do something. But what was left to do? The scene had already started to shift. People were glancing our way now, sensing the tension in the air. I could feel her presence next to me, like a phantom, her eyes darting nervously from me to Thomas. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but I held up a hand to stop her. Not this time. Not tonight. You think it's funny, don't you? I said, my voice controlled, but low with fury. The way you've been playing this little game behind my back, thinking I wouldn't notice? You thought I wouldn't catch on? Thomas's smirk didn't falter. Look, man, he said, almost lazily. If you're here to accuse me of something, maybe you should take a step back and think about what you're actually saying. You're overreacting. Overreacting? I could feel the blood rush to my face, a hot wave of anger clouding my judgment. But I forced myself to breathe, forced myself to keep it together. This wasn't the time to lose control, not yet. I needed him to understand. You think this is just some misunderstanding, that you're just a nice guy showing some attention? I pressed on, my words deliberate, every syllable calculated. No, Thomas, this is about something else. This is about disrespect. You've been disrespecting me, my wife, and our marriage. And I won't stand for it. For the first time, his smile wavered slightly, but only for a fraction of a second. It was barely noticeable, but I caught it. His calm demeanor faltered just enough to show a crack in his carefully curated mask. The guy wasn't as unshakable as he wanted me to think. You're making a scene, man, he said, his voice lowering now, just a hint of annoyance creeping in. This isn't the place for this. No, it's exactly the place for this, I shot back, my words cutting through the space between us like a blade. This isn't just about a party. This is about you trying to get into my wife's head, trying to get between us. I could see my wife shrinking next to me, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. She hadn't spoken yet, and the longer this dragged on, the more distant she seemed. Her eyes were wide, her lips trembling as if she wasn't sure what would come next. "Let's be real here," Thomas said, finally uncrossing his arms and leaning in slightly. He was playing it cool, but I could tell he was getting frustrated. Good. That was exactly what I wanted. Your wife is an adult. She can make her own choices. She doesn't need you telling her what to do. I felt the temperature in the room drop, the words like ice. It stung, but it only fueled my resolve. I turned to her, finally meeting her gaze head-on. "Is that what this is about?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but laced with hurt. "You think you can make your own decisions behind my back? You think I wouldn't notice you giving him what he wants? You've been sneaking around, haven't you?" She recoiled slightly, her face flushing with shame. But she still didn't speak. I could see the guilt written all over her, the way she tried to avoid my gaze, but the truth was inescapable. Thomas, sensing my momentary weakness, took a step closer to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. His touch was too familiar, too confident. And in that instant, something inside me snapped. "No," I said sharply, my voice low and dangerous, a command that cut through the air. "You don't get to touch her like that. Not here. Not ever." He looked at me for a moment, that same smug expression on his face, before his eyes flicked down to where his hand rested on her shoulder. For the first time, there was hesitation in his eyes, but only for a split second. He quickly removed it, straightening up. "Look, man," he said again, his tone shifting from cocky to slightly defensive. "You don't want to do this. You don't know what you're getting into." I took a step forward, narrowing the distance between us. The room felt smaller, the air thicker with tension. "I'm getting into the truth. I'm getting into the fact that you've been playing with my wife's emotions, and that ends tonight." Thomas looked over at my wife, his expression now unreadable. She was pale, frozen in place, her hands clenched by her sides. She didn't seem to know what to do, whether to stand up for me, or to side with him. I saw it then, the doubt in her eyes. The uncertainty. And I knew, in that moment, that she was just as much a part of this as he was. "Are you going to say something?" I turned to her, my voice hard now, demanding an answer. "Are you going to explain this? Or are you just going to stand there while he thinks he's won?" Her lips parted, but the words wouldn't come. I could see her struggling, torn between us. I couldn't understand it. How could she have let this happen? How could she stand there, letting him get away with it? Thomas saw his opportunity. With a small, almost imperceptible nod, he moved a step closer to her, placing his hand on her lower back. It wasn't a casual gesture. It was possessive. And that was it. Before I knew it, I was moving. The rage that had been simmering inside me for the past few minutes erupted, and I shoved Thomas away, the force of it sending him stumbling backward. He caught himself against the edge of the bar, glaring at me now, his face twisted in disbelief. "You think you can just waltz in here, touch her like that, and nothing will happen?" I said, my voice dangerously low. "Not anymore. You've crossed a line." I could feel the eyes of the room on us now, the silence so heavy I could almost taste it. But I wasn't about to back down. Not now, not after everything I had seen. Thomas's smug expression was gone now, replaced by something that almost resembled anger. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes flashing with a mixture of contempt and frustration. "You've made a mistake, buddy," he growled, stepping back toward me. But I was done with words. This wasn't about reasoning anymore. This was about making him understand that there were consequences for what he had done. And tonight, those consequences were about to come crashing down. I didn't care about the crowd. I didn't care about the looks, the judgment, or what anyone thought. My marriage, my trust, it was all on the line. And I was done letting him play with it. I'm not done with you, I said, my voice cold. Not by a long shot. As I said those words, I watched his face shift, just a flicker, but it was enough. The self-assured Thomas, the guy who thought he could get away with anything, was beginning to realize that his world was about to come crashing down. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. The night had only just begun, but I knew one thing for certain, it was going to be his worst nightmare. The silence in the room was deafening. It was as though everyone had collectively held their breath, waiting for the next move, the next escalation. I stood there, my chest heaving with the weight of everything that had led to this moment, and Thomas, still rubbing his shoulder, straightened up and glared at me with a mixture of rage and surprise. But I wasn't intimidated. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a statement. You think you can just walk in here and take what's mine? I repeated, my voice cold and controlled, but there was an edge to it that made him hesitate. You think you can just act like you're the man in this room? Thomas took a step back, his eyes narrowing. For the first time since we'd exchanged words, I saw the mask crack. The smooth charm, the confident attitude, it was all starting to slip away. Listen, I don't know what you think is going on here, but you're seriously out of line, he said, but this time his words weren't as confident. They were defensive, and I could tell he was trying to salvage something. He was trying to regain control. But there was no going back. Not now. Out of line? I repeated, my voice rising just enough for the people around us to hear. No, Thomas. You're the one who's out of line. You've been crossing boundaries, making moves behind my back. You think I didn't see the way you were eyeing her? Touching her? Flirting with her like it was no big deal? Newsflash, this is a big deal. And you're going to regret thinking you could get away with it. At that moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. It wasn't guilt or fear, no, that would have been too easy. It was annoyance, a defensive, almost childish reaction to being called out. But I wasn't going to stop. I wasn't going to let him shrink into the corner and pretend none of this had happened. You don't know what you're talking about, he said again, but now it sounded more like a desperate attempt to keep control of the situation. His voice had lost its coolness. I could see the beads of sweat forming on his forehead, the flush creeping up his neck. I could sense his ego beginning to crack, his mask faltering more with every word. I wasn't about to let him regain his composure. No, you're wrong, I said, stepping closer to him, not backing down. I know exactly what I'm talking about. And you know it. You've been playing your little game with my wife for weeks now. But it ends tonight, right here, right now. I turned my attention to her then, letting my gaze rest on her for a long, agonizing moment. She was standing there, pale, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes downcast. She couldn't meet my gaze. It was as though she was trying to shrink into herself, to escape from the reality I was forcing her to face. You're not going to say anything? I asked her, my voice biting with hurt. After everything? After he's been making moves on you like this? She looked up at me, her eyes welling with tears, but the guilt was unmistakable. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She looked at Thomas, then back at me, her face torn between the two of us. It was clear as day, the longer this went on, the more I realized just how deep her involvement in this had gone. The signs had been there all along, and now, in the harsh light of reality, I could see it. I've been so stupid, haven't I? She finally whispered, her voice barely audible, her breath shaking. She wiped a tear from her cheek, but it didn't do anything to ease the tension. It was too late for apologies. Too late for excuses. Yeah, I said, my voice hard, you have. But I'm the one who has to live with that. I'm the one who's been trusting you, loving you, while you let him into our lives. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the situation was spiraling. He was used to controlling the narrative, to bending people to his will, but tonight, I wasn't backing down. And neither was she, it seemed. "You need to go," I said to Thomas, my voice cutting through the silence. "You've done enough damage here. Now get the hell out of my sight before I make you." He seemed to hesitate for a moment, and I could almost see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to calculate his next move. But there was nothing left for him to salvage. The room had gone from hushed whispers to tense silence. I knew people were watching, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I didn't care about anything other than making sure Thomas understood that he wasn't going to get away with this. Thomas took a step toward me, and for a moment, I thought he might swing at me, but instead, he stopped and glared at me one final time. "You're making a big mistake," he growled, his voice low. "This isn't over. You think you can just run me off? You think you've won?" I met his gaze, unwavering. "It's over. And you've lost." The look in his eyes was enough to tell me that he didn't believe me. That he still thought he had some power over the situation, that he could walk away and continue playing his game. But he couldn't. Not anymore. The power had shifted. He turned on his heel, his posture stiff, and walked out of the venue with the same swagger he'd entered with, but this time, there was no smug smile. There was no confidence. Only defeat. As soon as the door closed behind him, I turned back to my wife. The room seemed to expand around me, and the air felt charged, like something had just shattered and I was left to pick up the pieces. Her eyes were full of tears now, her lips trembling as she looked up at me. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice shaky. "I never meant to hurt you. I don't know what happened." I could barely hear her. The words didn't feel real. How could they? How could she explain something that felt like a betrayal of everything we had built? Everything we had fought for? "You didn't mean to?" I asked quietly, my tone icy. "How could you not? How could you let him get this close? How could you let him into our lives like this?" Her lips quivered as if she was searching for the right words, but there were no right words. "Not anymore." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her face crumpling in shame. I was confused. I didn't know how to stop it." "Stop it?" I said, my voice rising again, the hurt spilling over. "You didn't even try to stop it. You just let him in. You let him take pieces of you, and now we're here." "I know," she cried, her hands trembling as she reached for me. "I know. And I'm so sorry. I never wanted to lose you. I never wanted to hurt you. But the damage had been done. The trust was gone. The betrayal was too deep. And there was no coming back from it. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if we could fix this, if I could ever look at her the same way again. But I knew one thing, I was done pretending everything was okay. And no matter what she said, no matter how many tears she shed, I wasn't sure that it ever could be. The silence in the room stretched on, a heavy weight that threatened to suffocate both of us. My wife, standing before me with tears staining her face, was a picture of regret, but it was too little, too late. I could feel the distance between us growing with every second, an invisible chasm that had opened up between us the moment Thomas had touched her, the moment she'd allowed it to happen. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, but instead, I just stood there, frozen, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to pretend like nothing had changed, but another part of me, one that had been hurt so deeply, knew that forgiveness might never come so easily again. "You don't get it, do you?" I finally said, my voice low and broken. "You've crossed a line, and I'm not sure I can come back from that." She reached for me again, her hands trembling, but I took a step back. I couldn't bear the thought of her touching me right now, not after everything. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I swear, I never meant for any of this to happen." It just happened. I didn't know what to do. I was lost, and Thomas, he just made me feel like I mattered, like I was special. But I never meant to hurt you. The words cut through me like a blade. How could she say that? How could she justify it by claiming she was lost? How could she use Thomas's attention as an excuse for everything that had happened? Stop, I said sharply, holding up a hand. I don't want to hear it anymore. You don't get to play the victim here. You made your choices. You let him in, you let him get close. And now we're standing here, and you think a few words will fix this? You think saying sorry will make it all go away? She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, but I could see the guilt written all over her face. Her lips trembled as she opened her mouth to speak again, but I wasn't sure I could bear to hear more empty promises. I didn't want this, she said, shaking her head desperately. I didn't want to hurt you. I love you. I've always loved you. The words hung in the air, a bitter irony. How could she love me and still let herself fall into his trap? How could she allow herself to be swept away by his attention, by his charm, knowing full well that it would hurt me? I thought we had something stronger than that. I thought we had built something unbreakable, but now I wasn't so sure. If you loved me, I said quietly, my voice trembling with emotion, you would have walked away the moment you saw what he was doing. You would have come to me and told me the truth, but you didn't. You let it happen. And now it's too late. The room felt suffocating, the weight of her betrayal hanging over us like a storm cloud. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know if I even wanted to try. I'll do anything, she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. I'll do anything to make this right. I'll make it up to you, I swear. Just please, don't leave me. Please, don't walk away. But I couldn't promise her anything. I couldn't tell her that everything would be okay, that we could just move past this. The trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship had been shattered, and I wasn't sure how to rebuild it. Was it even possible? I don't know if I can do that, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I don't know if I can ever trust you the same way again. You let him in. You let him get close to you, and you didn't even think about what that would do to me. How could I ever forget that? Her face crumpled as she sank down onto a nearby chair, her sobs racking her body. Seeing her in so much pain should have moved me, but instead, all I could feel was a hollow ache. I was broken, and I wasn't sure how to fix myself, let alone fix what we had. Please, she said between gasps of breath. Please don't leave me. I love you. I'll never let him near me again. I swear, I'll cut him out of my life, just please. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was truly sorry, that she would change, that she would do whatever it took to make this right. But a part of me, the part that had been betrayed, wasn't sure I could ever look at her the same way again. Was I willing to forgive her? Was I willing to let go of the anger, the hurt, and try to rebuild? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The anger was still there, simmering just below the surface, but so was the love. I didn't know if that love was enough to overcome everything, but I knew I needed to make a decision. Do you love him? I asked, my voice tight, a cruel question I hadn't wanted to ask but couldn't keep inside any longer. Do you love Thomas? The question hung in the air like an accusation, and I could see her flinch as if I had slapped her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She just stared at me, her face a mixture of confusion and regret, as if she didn't know how to answer. I need to know, I said, my tone softer now, but the weight of it was undeniable. Do you love him? She closed her eyes, her hands gripping the armrest of the chair as if she was trying to hold on to something stable. No, she whispered finally, her voice hoarse. I never loved him. I thought he was just a distraction. But I don't love him, I swear. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that everything she was saying was true, that she hadn't fallen for him, that it had all just been a mistake. But somewhere deep inside, I felt that the damage was already done. Trust wasn't something you could just rebuild with words, it was something earned, and she hadn't earned it back. Not yet. I need time, I said, my voice low, the exhaustion in my words evident. I need time to think about everything. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I couldn't look at her anymore. The pain was too much. I turned and walked toward the door, not looking back. The only sound was the sobs echoing in the background, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not when I was the one who was broken. As I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me like a slap, but it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled in my chest. I didn't know what the future held for us, whether we would fix this or whether this would be the end. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. And as I stood there, alone in the night, I realized just how deep the wound had cut. The pain of betrayal wasn't something you could easily forget. It wasn't something you could just move past. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. All I knew was that I had to find a way to heal, whether that meant healing with her or without her. The night air was cold against my skin, but the chill I felt inside could not be compared. I stood on the edge of the parking lot, staring out into the empty darkness. My mind was racing, but the only thing that stood out in the whirlwind of thoughts was one painful, undeniable truth: nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't look at her the same way. I couldn't see her with the same trust, the same innocence that once defined our marriage. And that hurt more than I could put into words. It wasn't just about what she had done, it was the betrayal of the bond we'd built over years of love and loyalty. The love I had for her, the one that had once been pure and unwavering, felt like it was slipping through my fingers, a dream fading away into nothing. I wanted answers. I wanted clarity. But most of all, I wanted to escape from the agony that had become my reality. I needed space to think, to breathe, to process everything that had happened. I leaned against my car, the metal cool beneath my fingertips, and closed my eyes for a moment. The sound of her sobs from inside the venue still echoed in my mind, but I couldn't let them reach me. Not now. Not when I wasn't sure if I could even hear her anymore without feeling the ache of betrayal deep in my gut. I hadn't gone far, just a few yards from the venue, but I couldn't bring myself to step back inside. I knew what awaited me: more apologies, more promises. But promises weren't enough anymore. Words were just words, hollow echoes in the face of what had happened. I couldn't go back to that place of trust. Not right away, at least. A few minutes passed before I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was. She came to a stop beside me, but she didn't say anything at first. There was an uncomfortable pause, a long stretch of silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I could feel her presence next to me, her energy still vibrating with guilt and sorrow, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her again. I wasn't sure if I ever would be. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said finally, her voice so soft it almost got lost in the stillness of the night. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to respond. I know I've hurt you. I can't take it back, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right. Please, just tell me what you need from me. I'll do it. There was desperation in her voice, but it didn't break through the wall I'd built around my heart. How could I believe her? How could I trust her words after everything that had unfolded? She had allowed someone else to get that close. She had let Thomas into our lives, into our marriage, and that was something I couldn't just erase from my memory. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked, my voice rough and hoarse from the weight of everything I was holding inside. Why didn't you come to me? Why let him play with your emotions like that? Her eyes filled with tears again, but she wiped them away quickly, as if to regain some composure. I don't know, she said, shaking her head in frustration. I was confused. I was lost. And when he gave me attention, when he made me feel important, I just let it happen. I didn't want it to get this far. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I replied, my voice bitter. You did hurt me. And now you want me to believe that it was all some kind of mistake? That it didn't mean anything? How do I believe you after this? Her face crumpled again, and I saw the hurt in her eyes. She didn't know how to fix it, and I didn't know how to help her. Not right now. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I know it's going to take time, but I'm asking you to at least give me a chance to prove that I'm still the person you married. I still love you. I still want to be with you. I swear, I'll do whatever it takes. The words sounded rehearsed, like she had said them over and over to herself, convincing herself that she could fix this. But the reality was, the damage was done. The trust was broken, and no amount of apologies or promises could change that overnight. I don't know if I can, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. The woman I thought I knew. I don't know who she is anymore. The pain in her eyes was almost too much to bear, but I couldn't look away. I needed her to see that this wasn't just a small mistake. It was a betrayal. A fundamental fracture in what we had. And I wasn't sure how we could ever fix that. I'm sorry, she whispered again, her voice breaking, her shoulders trembling. I'm so sorry. I took a deep breath and stepped away from her, walking toward the edge of the parking lot. The night felt oppressive, like the air itself was too thick to breathe. I wanted to scream, to shout at the heavens, to demand answers, but instead, I stood there, silently, wrestling with everything that had just happened. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel anymore. My emotions were a tangled mess, anger, pain, betrayal, but there was also love. There was still a part of me that wanted to believe that we could work through this, that we could rebuild what we had. But was that even possible? Could I ever trust her again? Could I ever trust myself, knowing that I had allowed things to go this far without seeing the signs? I don't know, I said finally, my voice thick with unshed emotion. I don't know if I can forgive you. And I don't know if I even want to try right now. She took a step toward me, but I held up my hand, signaling for her to stop. I couldn't let her get any closer. Not yet. I need time, I repeated, my voice more resolute this time. I need space to figure this out. I don't know what I want or what I need right now, but I can't make any decisions in the middle of this. Not when I'm still so angry. Not when I'm still so hurt. She nodded, her shoulders sagging with the weight of my words. The tears kept coming, falling silently as she wiped her face, but I didn't reach for her. I couldn't. I'll be here when you're ready, she said softly, her voice breaking as she spoke the words. I'll be here waiting. I love you. I don't want to lose you. I turned away without saying anything, without looking back. I didn't know if I could ever be ready. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. But I also didn't know if I could walk away from everything we had built together. As I stepped into my car and started the engine, I felt the weight of the decision I had to make, whether to fight for us or to let go. And in that moment, all I knew was this: I was broken. We were broken. And healing, if it ever came, would be the hardest thing I'd ever have to do. The next few days felt like a haze. The world around me continued moving, but I remained frozen in place, trapped in the aftermath of everything that had transpired. I avoided her as much as possible. The silence between us had become suffocating, and though she tried to reach out, tried to talk to me, I wasn't ready to face her. Not yet. Not when every word, every glance felt like a reminder of the betrayal. I spent my nights in a haze of uncertainty, sleepless, restless, replaying every moment, every word from that night over and over again in my mind. How had I missed the signs? How had I allowed this to happen without confronting it earlier? It was maddening. The guilt gnawed at me just as much as the anger did. But even more than that, There was something else I was battling, the part of me that still loved her. The part of me that wanted to believe her, that wanted to believe we could rebuild what had been broken. It was that small, fragile hope that haunted me, pushing me to search for a way forward. And then, on the fourth night after the party, she came to me. It was late, nearly midnight, and I had just returned home after spending hours walking around the city, trying to clear my head. The house felt empty and cold as I stepped inside, but when I heard her footsteps behind me, I froze. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice soft but firm. I turned slowly, facing her for the first time since that night. Her eyes were red from crying, but she looked determined, like she had made up her mind about something. She wasn't going to back down this time. "I know you need space," she began, taking a step closer. "But I can't keep waiting for you to come to me. I can't keep living like this, with all this silence between us. I need to know where we stand. I need to know if you're willing to fight for us or if this is the end." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been avoiding this moment, the moment where we would face the truth head-on, but there was no running from it anymore. I didn't know if I was ready, but I also knew I couldn't keep hiding from the reality of what had happened. The question that hung in the air was simple: could we move past this, or was it time to let go? "I don't know if I can," I admitted, my voice raw with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way. You let him in. You let him cross a line that I can't just erase from my mind." She nodded, her face contorting with pain. "I know. And I'm so sorry for that. I wish I could take it all back. I would give anything to go back and change the way things went, but I can't. All I can do is show you that I'm still here. That I want to fight for us." The sincerity in her eyes was undeniable. But sincerity wasn't enough. Could I really believe that she wouldn't make the same mistake again? Could I ever trust her in the same way after everything that had happened? "I don't know how to forgive you," I said, my words coming out like a confession. "I don't know if I can. But what I do know is that I don't want to lose what we had. I don't want to lose you." The room felt charged with emotion, both of us standing there, trying to navigate the wreckage of what was once a secure, unshakable relationship. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the raw vulnerability that made it impossible for me to completely shut her out. She had hurt me, yes, but she was also hurting. And I could feel that deep inside. "I don't know what the future holds," I continued, my voice barely a whisper, "but I know we have a choice. We can either tear this all down and walk away from each other, or we can try to rebuild. I can't promise it will be easy. I can't promise that everything will go back to the way it was, but I'm willing to try. If you are." Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. I could see the walls around her breaking down, the armor she had built around herself cracking under the weight of my words. "I'll do anything," she said, her voice fierce with determination. "I'll prove to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with. I'll prove to you that I'm not the person I was in that moment. I want to make this right." I stood there, staring at her, my heart torn in two. I didn't know what the right choice was. I didn't know how to fix what was broken. But one thing was certain: I couldn't walk away from her without giving it one last chance. "I can't promise it will be easy," I said, the words coming out slower this time, as if I were trying to convince myself as much as I was convincing her. "But I'll try. For us. For what we had." She stepped forward then, closing the distance between us, and this time, when she reached for me, I didn't pull away. Instead, I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close as if I could physically hold together the pieces of our shattered relationship. "I love you," she whispered, her voice muffled against my chest. "I'm sorry. I will never let you down again." The sincerity in her words, the way she held me, made me want to believe her. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back. Maybe we could heal from this, but only time would tell. And as I held her, feeling the weight of everything that had happened between us, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. We would have to work through the hurt, through the mistrust, and through the scars that remained from the betrayal. But we were still standing together. And in that moment, that was enough. It wasn't the perfect solution. It wasn't the easy path. But it was a path forward, a path that would take time, effort, and more forgiveness than either of us could have imagined. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in days, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe we could fix this. Maybe, in time, we could find our way back to each other. But only time would tell.